Today we will discuss the main points from thermodynamics and thermochemistry. Thermodynamics deals with interconversion of heat energy with other forms of energy. Interconversion of heat energy with other forms of energy. Thermodynamics deals with macroscopic systems consisting of matter in bulk and not microscopic systems of individual atoms or molecules. So deals with the macroscopic systems but not microscopic systems of individual atoms or molecules. That is, in thermodynamics, we discuss properties of a system as a whole, but we do not discuss the properties of constituents of the system. We do not discuss the properties of constituents of the system. Thermodynamic equilibrium. It means the system should have the following three equilibria simultaneously. System must have the following three equilibria simultaneously. The first one, thermal equilibrium. Heat should not flow from one part of a system to another part of same system. That is, throughout the system, temperature must remain constant. So T is constant so that temperature heat will not flow from one part to another part. That is said to be thermal equilibrium. Then mechanical equilibrium. Mechanical work is done due to the pressure difference. So when you have, consider a cylinder with a gas having freely movable piston. Consider a cylinder having a gas with a freely movable piston. When pressure is applied on the piston moves down. And work is done on the system. Pressure is applied here. Piston moves down and work is done on the system. So the work is done due to the pressure difference. Now, mechanical equilibrium means throughout the system, pressure must remain same. That is said to be mechanical equilibrium. Means so that when pressure is same throughout the system, one part of a system does not do work on the other part of a system. When pressure is same throughout, one part of a system does not do work on the other part of a system. That is said to be mechanical equilibrium. Then comes chemical equilibrium. No change in the composition of any part of the system with time. That is to say, throughout the system, composition must remain same. That is, no change in the composition of any part of the system with time. If the three equilibria exist, then it is said to be in thermodynamic equilibrium. So thermodynamic equilibrium means thermal equilibrium, temperature remains same, mechanical equilibrium, pressure remains same, chemical equilibrium, composition remains the same. Then different types of systems. First one is open system. A system which can exchange matter as well as energy with surroundings. You can take hot liquid in open beaker. Suppose when you consider a vessel having some hot liquid here, so vapors can be seen now. Means it will be exchanging vapors with the surroundings, means mass is being exchanged. It also exchanges the heat with the surroundings now. So therefore, a hot liquid in open beaker exchanges both mass, there is a vapors here, as well as the energy. That can be considered as an open system. Closed system can exchange energy but not the matter with surroundings. When you take the same beaker consisting of water here, means hot liquid here, say hot liquid is there, and if you are closing this with a lid, then as it is closed with a lid, it cannot exchange matter with surroundings, but energy can be exchanged because it is a vessel, it's a metal vessel, so energy can be exchanged with the surroundings. It is said to be a closed system. Closed system means it cannot exchange matter but exchange energy with the surroundings. Isolated system. It cannot exchange neither matter nor energy with the surroundings. So both matter as well as energy cannot exchange with the surroundings. So any liquid in thermally isolated closed container like thermos flask. In thermal flask, heat cannot be exchanged. If it is closed, even matter also cannot be exchanged. Such a system can be called as isolated system. So three systems we have. Then comes the properties of system. Properties of system. The property of a system which is independent of the size and the mass. So independent of the size and the mass is said to be intensive property of a system. Temperature, density, surface tension, etc. These are the properties. These are the properties which are depending upon the nature of system. And intensive property is not additive property. Is not additive property means we cannot add density of two liquids to get the final density of the mixture. We cannot add density of two different liquids to get the final density of the mixture. So intensive property is not additive property. It depends upon nature, doesn't depend upon how much amount we take. Then comes extensive property. Extensive property depends upon the amount of the substance which we take. Amount which we take, that is to say mass, volume, etc. That is depends upon how much we take and doesn't depend upon what we take. Depends on how much we take but not on what we take. And it is an extensive property is additive property of a system means 10 grams of one substance 10 grams of one substance plus 10 grams of another substance if you take, you are going to get 20 grams of the mixture. 20 grams of mixture we can get now. Means we are in a position to add. We are in a position to add 10 grams of one substance to 10 grams of another to get the 20 grams of the mixture. So the mass is going to be additive in nature. Hence mass is said to be extensive property. So property which depends upon how much we take, not on what we take, itself is called extensive property. Then comes the state function and path function. We have state and path functions now. The value of the property of the system which depends on the current state, depends upon the current state of a system and is independent of the path. Depends upon the current state of a system and independent of path itself is called state function. Itself is called state function. So properties such as temperature, pressure, volume, energy, enthalpy, entropy, free energy come under state functions. Temperature, pressure, volume, energy, enthalpy, entropy, free energy are coming under state functions. And work done and Q, heat absorbed. These two are path functions. They are not state functions. So work and amount of heat absorbed or liberated will be coming under path functions, not the state functions. Then the process. The meaning of process. Process defines the way in which system changes its position from one thermodynamic state to another thermodynamic state. That defines the process means defines the way in which a system changes its position from one thermodynamic state to another thermodynamic state. Now different types of processes we have. They are isothermal, adiabatic, reversible, irreversible process, isobaric and isochoric process. Different type of processes. So a process means or process defines the way in which system changes its position from one thermodynamic state to another thermodynamic state. Let us take different type of processes now. Adiabatic process. Adiabatic process is one where no heat is exchanged between the system and surroundings. No heat is exchanged between the system and surroundings. That is, dq is equal to 0. dq is equal to 0. That is, this takes place in thermally isolated system. Thermally isolated, no heat exchange must happen. That is said to be thermally isolated one. From first law, dE is equal to dq plus dw, and applying adiabatic conditions here, dq is equal to 0. That implies dE must be equal to dw. Then dE must be equal to dw. That is to say, dE becomes dw if at all dq is equal to 0. That is, work is done at the expense of its energy. So work is done at the expense of its energy. So work done on the system will increase the energy of the system, and then work done by the system will decrease the energy of the system. If work is done on the system will increase energy of the system, work is done by the system will decrease the energy of the system. This is coming under adiabatic process. Isothermal process. Here the temperature of the system remains constant throughout. If temperature is kept constant, that is said to be isothermal process. To keep temperature constant, heat is exchanged between system and surroundings. To keep temperature constant, heat is exchanged between system and surroundings. So temperature being constant, we can take temperature being constant, energy of system will not change, therefore D is equal to 0. When temperature is constant, energy remains same. Energy remains same means D is equal to 0. Again from first law of thermodynamics, D is equal to dq plus dw, and here since D is equal to 0, we can say dw is equal to minus dE. dw is equal to minus dE. So if work is done, the system work is done by the system, heat is absorbed. If work is done by the system, heat is absorbed. If work is done on the system, heat is liberated. If work is done on the system, heat is liberated because it has maintained same temperature. Means, so work done on the system is equal to amount of heat liberated. Work done by the system is equal to amount of heat absorbed. Amount of heat absorbed. So that is work is done by the system means heat is absorbed. If work is done on the system means heat is liberated, such a way that energy remains same. So in isothermal process, temperature remains the same, energy remains same, and therefore dE is equal to 0 in isothermal process. Next, isochoric process. Isochoric process, volume remains the same. Isochoric process, volume remains same. So therefore delta V is equal to 0. When delta V is equal to 0, work is not done by the system. When there is no work done, dW remains 0. Again from first law of thermodynamics, since dW is equal to 0, dE becomes equal to dQ. dE becomes equal to dQ. So heat absorbed by the system is used to increase the energy of the system. Heat absorbed by the system is used to increase the internal energy of the system. That is D is equal to dQ we have, because work done is 0 in isochoric process. Then comes isobaric process. Isobaric process, here there is no change of pressure, implies delta P is equal to 0. No change of pressure, delta P is equal to 0 in the case of isobaric process. Then cyclic process we have. If system returns to its initial state after a series of processes, is called cyclic process. If a system returns to its initial state after a series of processes, it is said to be a cyclic process. Initial and final states are same in a cyclic process. Say for example, a system is moving from A to B, changing from A to B here, A to B, again say from B to C, and if at all C is moving back to again A, then that is A to B, B to C, C to A, it is said to be a cyclic process. So initial and final states became equal to A here now. So in cyclic process, initial and final states are same. So therefore state functions will be 0. Difference in state functions remains 0 in a cyclic process. Hence delta E, delta H is equal to 0 because initial and final states are same in cyclic process. Then comes reversible and irreversible processes. A reversible process is one where driving force is always infinitesimally greater than the opposing force. Such that system is in a series of equilibrium states. That is, a reversible process is one where driving force is always infinitesimally greater than the opposing force, such that system is in a series of equilibrium states. Hence, the process can be reversed by at any instant by increasing the opposing force by infinitesimally small amount. By increasing the opposing force by infinitesimally small amount, the process can be reversed. Such a process is said to be a reversible process. Theoretically, it takes infinite time to complete a reversible process. Then comes irreversible process. Irreversible process is one which takes place in one step, and there is an equilibrium only in initial and final states of the system. Here, equilibrium exists but only in initial and final states of the system, whereas in the reversible process, equilibrium exists in each and every step of the process. There's a difference between reversible and then irreversible process we have. Then comes the meaning of internal energy of a system. Meaning of internal energy of a system. Internal energy of a system is energy possessed by it due to its chemical nature and its thermodynamic state. Due to its chemical nature and its thermodynamic state. It is the sum of various types of energies of the system. Sum of various types of energies of the system. That is, sum of, we can take rotational energy, vibrational energy, translational energy, nuclear energy, electronic energy, etc. We have. It is sum of various types of energies of the system itself is called internal energy, which is equal to sum of rotational energy, vibrational energy, and translational energy, nuclear energy, electronic energy, etc. We have summation of all energies. And internal energy of the elements in their standard state is taken, means is defined as zero, is taken as zero. The internal energy of the elements in their standard state is taken as zero. Say for example, if you take carbon, say in graphite stage, carbon in graphite form, the energy is taken as zero. If you take sulfur in rhombic state, energy is taken as zero. If you take bromine in liquid state, its energy is taken as zero. Like that, the elements in their standard state, energy is taken as zero. The internal energy is taken as zero for the elements in their standard states. Then comes the meaning of enthalpy. Enthalpy of a system is the total heat content of the system. The total heat content of the system is the enthalpy of a system and is defined and is given by enthalpy H is equal to E plus PV. When you take the difference, delta H is equal to delta E plus P delta V we have. Delta H is equal to delta E plus P delta V we have. And from PV is equal to nRT, if pressure and temperature are kept constant, and if volume changes, that should be due to change in the number of moles of a system. If pressure and temperature are kept constant, and if at all volume changes, that should be due to change in the number of moles. Therefore, we can write P delta V is equal to as RT delta N you have. So here P and T are kept constant. So volume is changing here because of change in the number of moles of the system. Therefore, delta H is equal to delta E can be written as RT delta N. Means P delta V here, P delta V is replaced by RT delta N, where delta N is equal to change in the number of moles of gaseous products minus gaseous reactants. Change in the number of moles of gaseous products and gaseous reactants we have. Let us take an example and understand that. So reaction N2 and 3H2 giving rise to 2NH3. Here delta N is equal to number of moles of gaseous products, that is 2 we have, so 2 here, minus number of moles of gaseous reactants, that is 1 here and 3 here we have, altogether 4, minus 2. So minus 2 is called delta N of this reaction. And if delta H is equal to minus 90 kilojoules at 298 Kelvin, what is the value of delta E for the reaction? So delta E is given by delta H minus RT delta N from the reaction given to us. And the value is equal to delta E is, you should find out delta E value. Now, delta H is given as 90 kilojoules per mole. So, substituting the reaction, finally you are going to get minus 85.04 kilojoules. And value of R is taken as 8.314 10 to the power of minus 3. The value comes in so many kilojoules per mole per Kelvin. So, this is how to calculate the problems related to delta H and delta E, and delta N stands for number of moles of gaseous products minus number of moles of gaseous reactants we have. Then work done in isothermal and adiabatic reversible processes. The formulas of work done in isothermal and adiabatic reversible processes. Work done in isothermal reversible process is given by W is equal to minus 2.303 nRT log V2 by V1 minus 2.303 nRT log V2 by V1, where V1 is the initial volume, V2 is a final volume at a constant temperature T we have, or else W is also equal to minus 2.303 nRT log P1 by P2. We know that volume is inversely proportional to pressure, and therefore we can replace V2 by P1 and then V1 by P2 we can replace. So any of these two can be used to find out the work done in isothermal reversible process. Then comes work done in adiabatic reversible process. That is given by work done is equal to NCV T2 NCV T1 minus T2 we have, where CV stands for molar heat capacity at a constant volume. CV stands for molar heat capacity at a constant volume. NCV delta T or NCV T1 minus T2 gives the amount of work done in adiabatic reversible process. Then thermochemistry. Thermochemistry deals with the study of enthalpy change during a physical and chemical process. It deals with the study of enthalpy change during physical and chemical processes. Physical change involves process like melting of the ice, melting you can say, boiling of a liquid, and transition of a substance from one allotropic form to another allotropic form. So physical change involves the melting of substances, boiling of liquids, excuse me, and transition of one substance from one allotropic form to another allotropic form. Then meaning of thermochemical equation. Thermochemical equation. A balanced chemical equation in which the physical states of reactants and products along with the energy change and temperature at which reaction are given. It's a balanced chemical equation in which physical states of reactants and products along with the energy change and the temperature at which reaction takes place are given. That is called thermochemical equation. So it indicates the enthalpy change during physical or chemical process. Say for example, carbon dioxide plus oxygen. So carbon solid substance, oxygen gaseous state we have. Giving carbon dioxide gas, enthalpy change is minus 393.5. Suppose if temperature is not given, it is understood that reaction takes place at 25 degrees Celsius, that is 298 Kelvin. So in a reaction, if temperature is not given, it is understood that reaction takes place at 25 degrees Celsius we have. Then if heat is liberated in an exothermic reaction, then delta H is equal to negative for us. Heat is absorbed in endothermic reaction, and so delta H value is positive. Heat is given off in exothermic reaction, delta H is negative. Heat is absorbed in endothermic reaction, delta H is equal to positive for us. Then comes meaning of enthalpy of a reaction. Enthalpy change involved when number of moles of reactants as indicated by balanced chemical equation have completely reacted under given set of conditions is called enthalpy of reaction. Enthalpy change involved when the number of moles of reactants as indicated by the balanced equation have completely reacted under given set of conditions is called enthalpy of reaction. Say for example H2 plus O2, half O2, say giving rise to H2O. So say delta H is equal to, in this case, suppose delta H is equal to minus 68 kilocalories. So this can be called as enthalpy of reaction. Means when 1 mole of what is being formed under given set of conditions, enthalpy change is minus 68 in this case. So this is called enthalpy change of the reaction. Then enthalpy change depends on what? Enthalpy depends upon the physical states of reactants and products. Same reaction, if you are changing the physical states of reactants and products, the total enthalpy change is going to be different. And if it depends on quantity of reactants also. If you take more amount of substances, once again delta H value changes because delta H is an extensive property, so depends upon the amount of substances which we take. Depends upon the temperature at which reaction takes place. Also depends on temperature, and finally depends on the conditions, that is condition of constant pressure or constant volume maintained during the reaction. Condition of constant pressure, constant volume maintained during the reaction, that is at constant volume or at a constant pressure reaction takes place. That also must be taken into account. So enthalpy of reaction depends upon, that is physical states, quantity of reactants, temperature and external conditions we have. Then different types of heats of formation. The first one is called enthalpy of formation. Enthalpy of formation. Enthalpy change that occurs when 1 mole of a compound in its standard state is formed from its elements in their standard states is called enthalpy of formation. The enthalpy change that occurs when 1 mole of compound in its standard state is formed from its elements in their standard state is called standard enthalpy of formation. At a standard state, excuse me, at the standard state, the temperature is 298 Kelvin and pressure is 1 atmosphere. Pressure is 1 atmosphere means that is equivalent to 101.3 kilopascals. At the standard state, the temperature is 298 Kelvin and pressure is 1 atmosphere, which is equal to 101.3 kilopascals. More negative value of enthalpy of formation, more stable the compound. Means exothermic compounds are more stable. That is to say, the compound is having lesser energy when compared to that of reactants. Implies lesser energy always leads to more stable state. So therefore, exothermic compounds are much more stable when compared to endothermic compounds. Say enthalpy of formation of HF and HCl are given like this, that is to say minus 268.6 and minus 92.3 we have. And so here we can say HF is more stable because HF is having higher heat of formation when compared to that of HCl. Enthalpy of formation can be positive or even negative also. It can be positive or negative. And for exothermic compounds, delta H is negative, and for endothermic compounds, delta H is going to be positive. So heat of formation for HCl and HF are given to us, and the values are different values we have. Now, for example, let us take a reaction to understand. Say carbon plus O2, say gas, giving rise to CO2. Say gas here. Delta H is equal to minus 94 kilocalories. So here 1 mole of compound is formed from constituent elements. So this value can be called as enthalpy of formation of carbon dioxide. Suppose we have another reaction like this, H2 plus Cl2 giving rise to say 2 HCl. Say delta H is given as say minus 44 kilocalories. This minus 44 kilocalories cannot be called as heat of formation of HCl because it is you can say it is heat of reaction. 2 moles of compounds are being formed. We define enthalpy of formation as when 1 mole of compound is to be formed. So therefore, enthalpy of formation of HCl can be written as, so delta H, heat of formation here, enthalpy of formation of HCl will be equal to minus 44 by 2, which is equal to minus 22 per kilocalorie. So therefore this delta H value can be called as enthalpy of formation of HCl. So always 1 mole of compound must form from constituent elements. That is defined as enthalpy of formation of the element. Enthalpy of formation of the compound. Now enthalpy of combustion. The enthalpy change that occurs when 1 mole of a substance is completely burnt in excess of oxygen. Enthalpy change that occurs when 1 mole of substance is burned completely in excess of oxygen, and heat is always given, and therefore enthalpy of combustion is always a negative value. So delta H value for heat of combustion will be always negative. Enthalpy of combustion indicates stability of compound also. The enthalpy change that occurs when 1 mole of substance is completely burned in excess of oxygen, that is said to be enthalpy of combustion. Said to be enthalpy of combustion, and enthalpy of combustion is always a negative value. Let us take 3 examples to understand clearly enthalpy of combustion and enthalpy of formation. Let us take C plus O2, giving rise to CO2. Say delta H1, enthalpy of this reaction. C plus half O2, giving rise to CO. Say delta H2, enthalpy of this reaction. CO plus half O2, giving rise to CO2, say delta H3 for this reaction we have now. Now here delta H1 is called heat of formation of carbon dioxide, because 1 mole of CO2 is formed from the constituent elements there now, and also called heat of combustion of carbon, because carbon is burned completely in excess of oxygen. So delta H1 is heat of formation of CO2 as well as heat of combustion of carbon. When you take delta H2, that is called heat of formation of CO, which is called heat of formation of CO, but not called as heat of combustion of carbon, because carbon is not burned completely in excess of oxygen, it is only partially burned here. So therefore delta H2 is called heat of formation of CO, but not heat of combustion of carbon. Delta H3 can be called as heat of combustion of CO, but not as heat of formation of CO2, because here it is not formed from the constituent elements. Therefore delta H3 is a heat of combustion but not heat of formation. There is a basic difference between heat of combustion and heat of formation. Then comes enthalpy of neutralization. Enthalpy of neutralization. So it is a change in enthalpy that occurs when 1 gram equivalent weight of an acid, 1 gram equivalent weight of an acid is completely neutralized by 1 gram equivalent weight of a base. Enthalpy change occurs when 1 gram equivalent weight of an acid is completely neutralized by 1 gram equivalent weight of a base, both being present in dilute solutions. Because in the case of dilute solutions, ionization will be complete. So for example, when you take say NaOH, sodium hydroxide, in its aqueous solution plus HCl, say aqueous solution, giving rise to NaCl, aqueous solution plus H2O. Here energy given off is minus 13.7 kilocalories. 13.7 kilocalories we have. We have taken NaOH aqueous solution, HCl aqueous solution. We have taken a dilute solution in both the cases now. And this means here we have taken say 40 grams here and then say 36.5 grams here. Means you have taken one equivalent of this. Under these conditions, whatever heat is given off itself is called heat of neutralization. Now the enthalpy of neutralization of a strong acid and a strong base is always constant, and the value is minus 57.3 kilojoules. That is nothing but minus 13.7 kilocalories per mole. Enthalpy of neutralization of a stronger acid and a stronger base is always constant, and the value is minus 13.7 kilocalories we have now. That is, in the case of stronger acid and stronger base, the molecule undergoes complete ionization. The case of stronger acid and stronger base, the molecule undergoes complete ionization. Complete ionization. Therefore, neutralization involves formation of 1 mole of water from 1 mole of H plus and 1 mole of OH minus. Therefore, neutralization involves the formation of only 1 mole of water from 1 mole of H plus and then 1 mole of OH minus. It means so 1 mole of H plus 1 mole of OH minus involves giving rise to H2O. Under these conditions, delta H value is equal to minus 13.7 kilocalories we have when you take 1 mole of these two. Now, the enthalpy of neutralization when any one of them or both are weak, the value is different from, that is minus 57.7, different from the value minus 57 we have. That is to say here, now when you take, for example, that is a stronger acid and stronger base here, they undergo complete ionization. So NaOH plus HCl gives rise to NaCl plus H2O. NaOH in its complete aqueous solution, we have only Na plus OH minus plus H plus Cl minus, giving rise to Na plus Cl minus plus H2O. So when you see the net reaction is, so here Na plus Cl minus Cl plus are same. So it's only the formation of water molecule from H plus and OH minus. So during the neutralization of strong acid and strong base, only it involves the formation of 1 mole of water from 1 mole of H plus and 1 mole of OH minus. Therefore, the value is always constant. It involves only formation of 1 mole of water from that of H plus and OH minus. If one of them or both are weak, the reaction also involves formation of 1 mole of H plus and formation of 1 mole of OH minus and then formation of 1 mole of water. When one or both of them are weak, it has two steps in that. It involves formation of 1 mole of H plus, formation of 1 mole of OH minus, and then it involves the formation of 1 mole of water molecule. Whereas in the case of strong acid and strong base, already we have 1 mole of H plus and 1 mole of OH minus, therefore involves only formation of 1 mole of water from 1 mole of H plus and 1 mole of OH minus in the case of stronger acid. That is to say, when you take NaOH plus say CH3COOH weaker acid here, forming sodium acetate plus water. In this reaction, this is a weaker acid. Acetic acid is a weaker acid now. It will not ionize completely. And therefore, this also involves the formation of 1 mole of H plus from this. This compound always undergoes complete ionization. It directly gives us 1 mole of OH minus. So, here the value of delta H value will be always lesser than 13.7. Say for example, say the value may be equal to only 13.0 kilocalories here now. The 0.7 has been absorbed for the ionization of weaker acid in this case now. So, excuse me, when strong base and weak acid involves, here, there are two steps. Step 1 is the formation of 1 mole of H plus from weaker acid, which involves absorption of energy, and then formation of 1 mole of water from H plus and OH minus, which liberates energy. Therefore, net value will be always less than 13.7 because it involves formation of H plus from weaker acid, which is an endothermic process. Therefore, in such a case, we can give heat of neutralization as as say minus 57.3 plus heat of ionization. It can be of weak acid or weak base or both. Heat of neutralization will be equal to minus 57.3 plus it should be heat of ionization of weaker acid or weaker base or both. Is going to give us lesser amount of heat because this part is absorbing some amount of heat for that. So enthalpy of ionization of weaker acid is the difference between minus 15 minus 57.3 and actual value of enthalpy of neutralization. From the formula we can understand that is to say heat of ionization will be equal to difference between the heat of neutralization here and then 57.3 we have. Weaker the acid or base, weaker the acid or base is, weaker the acid we can say or base, more is the enthalpy of ionization. So weaker the acid or base, more is the enthalpy of ionization. So more weaker acids will absorb more heat for their ionization. So weaker the acid, greater is the absorption of heat of ionization. Then comes meaning of enthalpy of solution. Then comes meaning of enthalpy of solution. It is a change in the enthalpy that occurs when 1 mole of solute is dissolved in excess of solvent. 1 mole of solute is dissolved in excess of solvent such that further dilution do not bring any more heat changes, such that further dilution there is no additional heat change. Means, for example, let us take sodium sulfate. You have taken 1 mole here, solid substance. That to added here water. Water should be excess here. Water is excess, giving rise to say 2Na plus. It will be aqueous plus SO4 minus 2 aqueous. Then some delta H value. So delta H is equal to Q kilocalories now. Now this value can be called as heat of solution because you have taken here excess of water. So when you add further amount of water also, further dilution should not bring any more heat changes. Itself is said to be enthalpy of solution. And enthalpy of solution depends upon two energy factors. So you can take delta H solution is equal to heat of hydration plus lattice enthalpy. Plus it is lattice enthalpy. Heat of hydration plus lattice enthalpy. So the value depends upon summation of these two energy factors there now. So if at all hydration energy is more than lattice enthalpy, then heat of solution is going to be negative value. If lattice enthalpy is more than hydration enthalpy, then heat of solution is going to be positive value. So it depends upon the heat of hydration as well as the lattice energy. Heat is absorbed when ionic compounds like ammonium chloride is dissolved. It implies that ammonium chloride has more lattice enthalpy than heat of hydration. Therefore, the value is positive. And if at all heat is given, it is said to be negative. That is to say, when you take the compounds like dissolution of concentrated sulfuric acid, heat is evolved. It implies that they have more heat of hydration than their lattice enthalpies. So depends on heat of solution, while it depends upon two energy factors, heat of hydration and heat of solution. If heat of hydration is more, then delta H is going to be negative. If lattice enthalpy is more, then the heat of solution is going to be positive value. Then comes enthalpy of transition. Enthalpy of transition. It is a change in the enthalpy that occurs when 1 mole of an element changes from one electropic form to another electropic form. It is an enthalpy change that occurs when 1 mole of an element changes from one electropic form to another electropic form. Say for example, white phosphorus changing into red phosphorus, delta H is equal to say minus 18 kilojoules. This value is nothing but amount of enthalpy change involving when 1 mole of phosphorus changes from white to red electropic form. And a negative sign shows that red phosphorus is more stable. Negative sign means it is exothermic in nature. Exothermic in nature means red phosphorus has less energy when compared to white phosphorus. System having less energy is always more stable. Therefore, we can say red phosphorus is more stable than white phosphorus. This is regarding heat of transition. Then enthalpy of fusion. So it is a change in the enthalpy that occurs when 1 mole of a substance changes from solid to liquid state. 1 mole changes from solid to liquid state is called enthalpy of fusion. That is to say, for example, H2O solid, if it becomes say H2O liquid, this enthalpy change can be called as enthalpy of fusion. That is, ice to water can be called as enthalpy of fusion. Enthalpy of vaporization. It is a change in enthalpy that occurs when 1 mole of a substance changes from liquid state to gaseous state. When 1 mole changes from liquid state to gaseous state, that can be called enthalpy of vaporization. Enthalpy of sublimation is equal to summation of fusion plus enthalpy of vaporization here. Now here sublimation means enthalpy change. During sublimation, solid substance directly changes from solid to gaseous state. During sublimation, the substance changes directly from solid to gaseous state. So this involves two steps, that is solid to liquid, liquid to gaseous state, and therefore enthalpy of sublimation is equal to summation of enthalpy of fusion plus enthalpy of vaporization. It involves two steps together. Then comes first law of thermochemistry. First law of thermochemistry, it states that amount of heat required to decompose a compound into its elements is equal to the amount of heat liberated when the same amount of compound is formed from constituent elements. It is defined as the amount of heat required to decompose a compound into elements is equal to amount of heat liberated when same amount of compound is formed from constituent elements. Say for example, if you take H2 plus half O2 giving rise to H2O. That is heat. Here formation we have taken. Say delta H is equal to minus 395.5. Now when you reverse the reaction H2O giving rise to H2 plus half O2, then here delta H value will be equal to plus, it will be 395.5 kilojoules we have now. That is, enthalpy of formation and decomposition are numerically equal but opposite in sign. Enthalpy of formation and enthalpy of decomposition are numerically equal but opposite in sign. So you have taken the example of water. So formation of water is exothermic in nature and decomposition of water is endothermic in nature. So numerically both the values are same. But opposite in sign. This is a first law of thermochemistry. Then comes second law of thermochemistry, which is also called Hess law of constant heat summation. Second law of thermochemistry. Now enthalpy change in a reaction is same whether the reaction takes place in one step or in several steps. Enthalpy change in a reaction is same whether the reaction takes place in one step or in several steps. So enthalpy of reaction does not depend on the method employed. So enthalpy change is a state function. Hence it doesn't depend upon the intermediate steps. So enthalpy change in a reaction is same whether the reaction takes place in one step or in several steps. Itself is called Hess law of constant heat summation. Then meaning of bond energy. Bond energy or else bond dissociation energy is the amount of energy required to break 1 mole of bonds. 1 mole of bonds of a particular type in the gaseous state. Bond energy or bond dissociation energy is the amount of energy required to break 1 mole of bonds of a particular type in the gaseous state. Energy required to break 1 mole of bonds is said to be bond energy. The enthalpy change of reaction can also be calculated using bond energy. Enthalpy change of reaction can also be calculated using bond enthalpy. So enthalpy change of reaction is given by bond energies of reactants is given by, you can say, bond energies of reactants minus, it can be written as bond energy of products. So actually enthalpy of reaction, the basic formula of enthalpy of reaction is given as, so delta H of reaction is equal to enthalpy of products minus it is enthalpy of reactants we have. So in terms of enthalpies, it is enthalpy of products minus reactants. In terms of bond energies, it is bond energies of reactants minus bond energies of products. Then meaning of spontaneous process. Meaning of spontaneous process. A process which takes place on its own or after proper initiation is called a spontaneous process. A process which takes place on its own or after proper initiation is called spontaneous process. Now, when you take radioactivity, 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 this process doesn't require any initiation. It automatically takes place. It's also a spontaneous process. When you take burning of LPG gas, burning of LPG gas means butane gas. So LPG gas plus oxygen burning. Now this one burning needs a matchstick. It needs a matchstick. It needs a matchstick now. So means it requires initiation. Once it starts burning, it continues burning. Once it starts burning, it continues burning now. Means here LPG gas requires initiation. Here radioactive doesn't require initiation, but once it starts, both of them move continuously. So spontaneous process takes place on its own or after proper initiation. That is said to be a spontaneous process. Now when it comes to non-spontaneous process, a process which does not take place by itself under a given set of conditions, does not take place by itself under a given set of conditions is called non-spontaneous process. Let us take, for example, electrolysis of water. It takes place as long as power is supplied. It takes place as long as power is supplied. So when you electrolyze water, H2O, it gives H2 plus half O2. We are passing here current. So the process takes place as long as current is supplied. As long as current is supplied. When we stop the current, the reaction stops. The electrolysis stops here. Means the process takes place as long as driving force exists. When we withdraw the driving force, say for example current in this case, the process will not take place. So a process which requires a continuous driving force is said to be non-spontaneous process. Which requires a continuous driving force is called non-spontaneous process. Then comes meaning of entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder of a system, or you can say randomness of a system. It is a measure of disorder or randomness of a system. The change in entropy during a process is given by, that is delta S is given by Q by T. Delta S is given by Q by T. Where Q reversible is a quantity of heat absorbed reversibly at a temperature T Kelvin. Absorbed reversibly at a temperature of T Kelvin we have. And units will be Q by T, so for units are so many joule per Kelvin. The change in entropy depends only on initial and final states. The change depends on initial and final states, and therefore entropy is also a state function. Depends only upon initial and final states, hence entropy is also a state function. Now in liquid, solid and vapor state, if you compare three states, we have more randomness in vapor phase. Therefore vapor state has higher entropy when compared to liquid or else solid state. Vapor phase has a greater extent of disorderness. Therefore vapor is having highest entropy. Now the greater the number of chemical bonds, suppose in the case of all three of them are gaseous states only. In such a case, we need to see the number of bonds. Suppose if you see acetylene gas, acetylene is having, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bonds are there. Ethane if you consider, we have in ethane molecule, there are 7 bonds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 here plus middle one 7. 7 bonds are there in the case of ethane molecule. Here we have 3 plus 2, 5 bonds are there now. So therefore more the number of bonds. If all of them are gaseous state, then see the number of bonds which are present. More the number of bonds is said to have, higher the entropy. Then the spontaneity of a process. Now enthalpy factor alone cannot explain the spontaneity. Enthalpy factor cannot alone explain the spontaneity. Therefore, second law introduced the concept of entropy. Therefore, second law introduced the concept of entropy. It says the direction of a spontaneous process is the direction in which total entropy increases. Second law says the direction of a spontaneous process is the direction in which total entropy. Total entropy means it should be entropy of system plus surroundings. Total value should increase. So for a spontaneous process here, entropy of universe increases. For a spontaneous process is accompanied by increase in the total entropy, means total entropy of system and surroundings. In other words, entropy of universe continuously increasing because of the processes which are taking place. So second law says the direction of a spontaneous process is the direction in which total entropy increases. Total entropy means system plus surroundings entropy. So delta S of universe is given by delta S of system plus delta S of surroundings. So if delta S of system universe is positive, then it is said to be a spontaneous process. If delta S of universe is said to be negative, said to be non-spontaneous process. And if it is 0, it is said to be an equilibrium state. So it depends upon the delta S of universe. Delta S of universe, positive, spontaneous process, negative, non-spontaneous, and 0 value, it is said to be an equilibrium state. The entropy of a substance at 25 degrees Celsius and 1 atmospheric pressure is called standard entropy and is excuse me, and is denoted by S naught value. The entropy of a substance at 25 degrees Celsius and 1 atmosphere pressure is called standard entropy denoted by S naught. And standard entropy of elements is not 0. Standard enthalpy of elements is 0. Standard entropy of elements is not 0. Then Gibbs energy. Then comes Gibbs energy or Gibbs free energy. It is the available energy with which system can do useful work. It is available energy with which system can do useful work is called Gibbs energy. It is given by Gibbs energy. H is given by G is given by H minus Ts, where T into S is non-available energy. So finally energy available is equal to H minus Ts is available energy, which is called Gibbs energy, with which we can do useful work. Now Gibbs-Helmholtz equation, that is delta G is equal to delta H minus T delta S. So for a spontaneous process, delta G will be negative. For a non-spontaneous process, delta G remains positive. At an equilibrium state, delta G is equal to 0. So the spontaneity can be understood from delta G values. Delta G negative, spontaneous, delta G positive, non-spontaneous, delta G 0 is going to be an equilibrium state. The free energy change for a process at 298 Kelvin and 1 atmosphere pressure, in which all reactants and products are in their standard state, is called standard free energy change and is denoted by delta G naught. The free energy change for a process at 298 Kelvin and 1 atmosphere, in which all reactants and products are in standard states is called standard free energy change and is denoted by delta G naught. The standard free energy of the formation of elements is 0. The standard free energy of the formation of elements is 0. The standard free energy of the formation of H plus is also 0. Means it will be like this. standard free energy change. So delta G naught of say H3O plus hydronium ion formation is equal to 0. Delta G naught standard free energy change of H2 of all elements is taken as 0. So the standard enthalpy of formation of the elements and standard free energy of the formation of the elements is taken as 0. Then Gibbs equation predicting the feasibility of reaction using Gibbs equation. Using Gibbs equation predicting the feasibility of reaction, that is delta G is given by delta H minus T delta S. So delta G must be negative for a process to be spontaneous. So if we take delta H less than 0, means delta H value negative, this value is negative value, and delta S greater than 0, so delta S is a positive value here. If delta H is negative and delta S is equal to positive, the overall value is always negative value. So such a process is always spontaneous at all the temperatures. So whatever may be the temperature, such process is going to be always spontaneous because delta G is always negative there. Now when you take delta H less than 0 and delta S less than 0, means in this reaction here, that is to say delta G is equal to delta H minus T delta S. So here delta H less than 0 means delta H is negative, this value is negative. Delta S less than 0, this value is also negative value we have. If both are negative value here, T delta S becomes a positive value. So therefore T delta S value must be small. That implies temperature must be small. If temperature is very low, then the entire process is going to be negative because delta G value will become negative. Means delta H outweighs T delta S value. If T is very much less, that is going to be spontaneous. If delta H is more than 0, delta S more than 0, means here delta G is equal to delta H minus T delta S. Both are positive values. So this is positive value. It's also a positive value. Means T delta S will be negative value. So if T delta S outweighs delta H, that is going to be spontaneous. Implies that temperature must be high. When T is high here, T delta S outweighs delta H value. There it is going to be spontaneous. If delta H is greater than 0, means if delta G is equal to delta H minus T delta S. So delta H more than 0, this value is a positive value. Delta S less than 0, so this value is negative value. Such a case, the overall delta G value will be always positive value, and therefore such a reaction is always non-spontaneous reaction. So the feasibility of reaction depends upon delta G, and then delta G depends upon delta G. In turn depends upon delta H and then delta S values. Then Van 't Hoff's equation, Van 't Hoff's reaction isotherm. Van 't Hoff's reaction isotherm is given by delta G is equal to delta G naught plus RT ln Q. RT ln Q. Q is called reaction quotient. It's a natural logarithm, so ln Q. If we are changing into the base 10, the equation becomes delta G plus 2.303 RT log Q. If we take an equilibrium state here, delta G will be 0. At equilibrium state, delta G will remain 0 there now. So when delta G is equal to 0, and then Q becomes equal to K. So if Q is equal to K or Kp, and then delta G becomes 0, that is to say we are at equilibrium state. So then what happens is delta G naught becomes equal to minus 2.303 RT log Kp. RT log Kp. This formula can be used to find out the equilibrium constant provided standard delta G naught value is given to us. The relationship between the standard free energy change and equilibrium constant is given by delta G naught. Delta G naught is equal to minus 2.303 RT log Kp. From this we can say if Kp is less than 0, delta G naught is if Kp is less than 1, Kp is less than 1, delta G naught is more than 0. And if Kp is more than 1, delta G naught becomes less than 0. This can be observed, this can be known by observing the equation itself. If Kp is equal to 1, then delta G naught will be equal to 0. So relation between the Kp and delta G naught can be known by observing the relation itself. Then comes the standard free energy change, relation between the standard free energy change and standard cell potential. The formula is given by delta G naught is equal to minus NF E naught, where E naught is the standard EMF of the cell. Today we will discuss properties of 13th and 14th group elements, that is p block. The differentiating electron enters the outermost p orbital. The elements belong to p block. Differentiating electron enters outermost p orbital, then element belongs to p block. 13th group elements are boron, aluminium, gallium, indium, thallium, and 14th group elements are carbon, silicon, germanium, tin, and lead. So today we will be discussing important properties of 13th as well as 14th group elements. First, periodic properties. So let us see the properties: atomic size, ionization potential, electronegativity, as well as reducing strength, nothing but SRP values. Is there, see the trend down the group. Atomic size has to increase down the group. So it is increasing from boron to aluminium, but gallium has lesser size when compared to aluminium. Remaining two are increasing down the group. So here the element gallium has d electrons in that which cannot screen nuclear charge effectively. Therefore, gallium experiences more nuclear charge. Hence, size of the gallium is less. Similarly, when you are moving from indium to thallium, also we can see very lesser increment of size from indium to thallium. Thallium is also having F electrons in that, and F electrons also cannot screen the nuclear charge. Therefore, thallium has the increment of size is very much less from indium to thallium. So gallium is having d electrons and thallium is having F electrons which cannot screen nuclear charge. Next property is ionization energy. Ionization energy will be decreasing down the group. Again, you can see the boron to aluminum is decreasing here. Gallium is having slightly again more than that of aluminum. So reason being same here. Gallium is having more nuclear charge. Hence IP value is more for gallium. Again, if you see from indium to thallium, again thallium is having slightly more value when compared to indium. There's once again same reason here. Thallium is having F electrons which cannot screen nuclear charge effectively. So thallium is having more nuclear charge, thereby it is having more ionization potential. When it comes to electronegativity, here, so En values should decrease down the group. They are decreasing from say boron to aluminum. They are decreasing. Again the value down the group, the values are slightly again they increasing here. So from boron to aluminum, the value is decreasing. Again, they are increasing from say gallium to thallium, the values are increasing. We can say this is because of discrepancies in atomic size of these elements, the values are again changing. When it comes to SRP values here, reducing strength is down the group is decreasing because of decreasing in the SRP values. You see SRP values is very much higher for aluminum, that is higher negative value says strong reducing agent. They are becoming lesser and lesser negative values. So reducing strength is down the group is decreasing because decreasing in the SRP value, decreasing in the negative SRP values. These are the periodic properties. So moving from boron to thallium, the size is increasing progressively due to the addition of new energy levels. The observed atomic radius of gallium is slightly smaller than that of aluminum. Slightly smaller because of d electrons in that. So when you see ionization enthalpy also, it's decreasing down the group due to increase of size. However, again we can see slight change in the case of gallium. Gallium is having slightly more than that of aluminum because of gallium is having more effective nuclear charge. Down the group, electronegativity is decreasing, say from decreasing from boron to aluminum. Again, we can see it's slightly increasing. This is because of, we can see, some discrepancies in the atomic size of these elements now. When it comes to the oxidation states here, the oxidation states, the common oxidation state of the elements is +3 here. However, down the group, again we can see +1 becomes more and more stable. +1 becomes more and more stable. That is because of inert pair effect. That is because of inert pair effect. Implies thallium exhibits a stable +1 state only. So that is reluctance of Ns electrons, Ns electron pair to participate in chemical bond formation is known as inert pair effect, and that inert pair effect will be increasing down the group, because we have just now seen that thallium is having F electrons which cannot screen the nuclear charge. Thereby, Ns electrons of thallium are firmly bound, and thereby Ns electrons are not involving in bonding in the case of thallium. So, down the group, inert pair effect will be increasing. So, down the group, we can see thallium exhibits only +1 oxidation state. Then, compounds. Oxides and hydroxides here, we'll see hydrates afterwards. The compounds, oxides as well as hydroxides here. So boron, both oxide as well as hydroxide, both the compounds are acidic in nature. Both the compounds are acidic in nature. Means if you are observing down the group, you can see that basic property is increasing now. So down the group, you can see basic property increases. Basic property increases down the group. So aluminum compounds, both hydroxide as well as oxides, they are amphoteric in nature. Even gallium compounds are also, both of them are amphoteric in nature. Indium oxide, hydroxide, basic in nature, and last thallium compounds are strongly basic in nature. So oxides and hydroxides, their basic property is increasing down the group. The first one being acidic in nature, remaining two are amphoteric in nature, and remaining last two are basic in nature. This is how the basic property changes down the group. Then compounds, that is halides, if you see, the elements are forming MX3 type of halides, we can say. General formula of these halides will be MX3 we have now. And boron halides, they are covalent in nature. They are covalent in nature and they have trigonal planar structure. They are electron deficient in nature, therefore they are Lewis acids. They are electron deficient because they have only 3 bonds. They require 2 more electrons to get stable octet configuration. So they are electron deficient and then they are acting as Lewis acids. The order of Lewis acidic character will be BF3 will be less than BCl3, less than BBr3, less than Ba3. Implies that BF3 is going to be least acidic in nature. Now this acidic property can be explained on this acidic, the order can be explained basis of the halogen boron pi bonding, which is also called back bonding there. That is, in BF3 molecule, boron is having empty 2p orbital. In BF3 molecule, we see boron has empty 2p orbital. So here empty, we have a 2p orbital is there. And the fluorine atom is having completely filled 2p orbital is there in the fluorine atom. So fluorine atom is having completely filled 2p orbital. Therefore, fluorine gives electron pair to boron. So fluorine gives one electron pair to boron here and thereby involves in the pi bond. This bond itself is known as back bonding also. So due to this BF bond, because of this one, the BF bond is getting partial double bond character. And due to this, it can't take electron pair effectively. Hence, Lewis acidic strength is least in the case of BF3 molecule. Such type of bonding is said to be back bonding. It's called back bonding. Then, so once again here, one of the 2p orbitals of fluorine atom having a lone pair overlaps sidewise with empty 2p orbital of boron atom and forms a pi back bonding, also known as back donation. That is, fluorine is having completely filled 2p orbital here and boron has empty orbital. So fluorine is overlapping sideways with the boron and forming a pi bond. Itself is known as back donation. Then compounds of halides here, let us take aluminum halides now. Aluminum halides are existing as dimers and dimeric structure of Al2Cl6. Each aluminum atom accepts a lone pair of electrons from chlorine chlorine atom bonded to other aluminium atom. That is to say, if you see the structure, so aluminium, two aluminium atoms are there and three chlorine atoms. So Cl, chlorine atoms here around aluminium. So AlCl3, these three AlCl3 normal covalent bonds here. Now this chlorine donates electron pair to this aluminum. Similarly, this donates electron pair to aluminum. Thereby it is existing as a dimeric structure. The entire two units exist together, which is called dimer. And if you are heating the structure to high temperatures, dimer structure exists in vapor state below a temperature of 473 Kelvin. When you cross the temperature, it dissociates to form trigonal planar monomeric structure. Means Al2Cl6 dimeric form. When heating to higher temperature is higher here, should be more than 473 Kelvin, then that exists as AlCl3 simple monomeric units. This is regarding structures of aluminum halides. Then come some important compounds of boron. Boron important compounds are borax, Na2B4O7 10H2O, then orthoboric acid or simply called boric acid, H3BO3, diborane, B2H6 molecule. Let us take the first compound, borax, which is Na2B4O7 10H2O. Now borax consists of different bonds here. So let us take the structure of borax. So that is boron. So four boron atoms, which are actually tetrahedral structure we have. Between two boron atoms, we have an oxygen atom bonded. That is BOB, we can say, oxygen atom bonded here. And between these two also, we have one more oxygen atom present. And we have hydroxyl groups bonded to each boron atom. So OH here, hydroxyl group here. If you see the structure here, some boron atoms are having 4 bonds. Let us take this boron is having 4 bonds. 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds are there. This boron is undergoing sp3 hybridization. If you see this boron atom is having 3 bonds are there. 1, 2, 3 bonds are there. And this boron undergoes only sp2 hybridization. Means some boron atoms are tetrahedrally bonded. Some of them are trigonal structures we have. And then we have here Na2, it is dot, we have similarly 8 water molecules are there outside this structure. So therefore we can say, we can write even the formula as Na2B4O5 OH taken 4 times dot 8H2O. It is also called sodium tetraborate. It is also called sodium, it is called sodium tetraborate, nothing but borax molecule. So some of them are sp3 hybridized boron atoms here. Some of them are sp2 hybridized boron atoms are there. So all boron atoms are not equivalent in borax. It is also known as sodium tetraborate structure. And there are 8 water molecules which are bonded to 2 sodium ions in the structure. The next, importance of borax. It is used in the borax bead test. Borax on heating loses water molecules, swells up. On further heating, it forms a transparent glassy bead. It forms a transparent glassy bead, which is actually basis for the borax bead test. So borax heating, first of all heating, it is losing these 10 water molecules here and forming sodium metaborate. And then it forms sodium tetraborate. It forms sodium tetraborate first. Sodium tetraborate. On further heating, it becomes no sodium metaborate. It becomes sodium metaborate. And it forms boric anhydride. This entire mixture itself is a transparent glassy mass. In the qualitative analysis, it is used to test for detection of some colored ions like copper, nickel, chromium, cobalt, etc. So the basis of the borax bead test is borax upon heating, it loses water molecules, swells up, and on further heating, it forms a transparent glassy bead. This is the main thing to know the presence of the metal ions. Transparent glassy bead. Let us take, for example, suppose when borax is heated with, say, some copper salts, it forms a blue color bead. Suppose you take a copper salt We're heating with a borax now. When copper salt is heated with the borax here, it forms copper metaborate is being formed. CuBO2 taken twice, it forms copper metaborate. Plus this will be again boric anhydride. This is blue in color. This compound is blue in color now. So blue color indicates the salt is that of copper salt. So different colors indicate presence of different metal ions there. Suppose if you take iron, it forms a green color bead, it forms. So green color bead indicates presence of iron salts in that. So when you take nickel, it forms brown color, bead will be brown in color. If you take manganese, the color is going to be pink color we have now. In this way, different colors of the beads indicate different metal ions. So it is used in the qualitative analysis of the metal ions. This is regarding borax bead test. Then orthoboric acid, or simply called boric acid, another compound of boron. It is a white crystalline solid and it is soapy to touch. It is sparingly soluble in water but highly soluble in hot water. And it is prepared from the hydrolysis of borax. Prepared from the hydrolysis of borax. So borax Na2B4O7 on hydrolysis it forms NaOH plus, it is forming H3BO3 which is a boric acid. So boric acid can be prepared by hydrolysis of borax. And boric acid is a weak monobasic acid. It is not a arrhenius acid. Means it is not a protonic acid, but it is actually as a Lewis acid there. So boric acid plus water, if you see, it forms tetraborate plus water. Plus it forms hydronium ion. Let us see the reaction. It is in this way. That is BOH taken thrice or the boric acid plus water. Let us write for convenience like this, H plus and OH minus. OH minus giving rise to. This being electron deficient takes electron pair and this changes into BOH taken 4 times. Plus is given as H plus ion there now. So therefore it's donating proton. Proton is given from water molecule. It's basically accepting electron pair. Electron pair acceptor. Therefore it is coming under Lewis acid. Therefore it is Lewis acid. It's not giving its proton. Hence it is not called protonic acid. Not called protonic acid. So boric acid is a very weaker acid. Is basically a Lewis acid, not a protonic acid. Then action of heat on borax. On heating action of heat on boric acid. On heating boric acid above 100 degrees Celsius, it forms metaboric acid. And further strong heating, that forms finally boric anhydride. So above 100 degrees, it forms metaboric acid. Further strong heating, it is going to give us boric anhydride. Let us see the reaction. So orthoboric acid, that is H3BO3, on heating to about 100 degrees Celsius, initially it forms metaboric acid. It forms HbO2, which is called metaboric acid. And the metaboric acid, so HbO2 on further heating, say to about 160 degrees Celsius, should be more than 100 degrees, then it forms tetraboric acid plus it is H2O. This molecule is called tetraboric acid. Tetraboric acid. And tetraboric acid, that is H2B4O7, tetraboric acid on further heating, means strong heating, finally you are going to get boric anhydride plus H2O. This action of heat on boric acid. So boric acid 100 degrees Celsius forms HbO2, which is called metaboric acid. Metaboric acid further heating gives rise to tetraboric acid. Tetraboric acid further heating gives rise to, that is boric anhydride. This action of heat on boric acid we have. When it comes to structure of boric acid, so boric acid contains trigonal borate units, that is BO3 minus 3. It has trigonal borate units in which boron atom is sp2 hybridized. Trigonal borate units in which boron is sp2 hybridized. it has hydrogen bond in solid state and has a two dimensional sheet type of structure. In solid state, it is having hydrogen bonds and is having two-dimensional sheet type of structure. So orthoboric acid has a trigonal borate units, that is BO3 minus units are there, and boron is sp2 hybridized. In solid state, it is having hydrogen bonds, it is having two-dimensional sheet type of structure is there for orthoboric acid. When it comes to hydrates, 13th group elements form hydrates of MH3 type of hydrates are there. But boron forms again different type of hydrates. They are collectively called boranes. Boranes are nothing but hydrates of boron. They are classified into two categories. Two series are there having a formula BnHn plus 4 which is called nidoboranes, and having a formula BnHn plus 6 which is called arcanoboranes we have. So nidoboranes and arcanoboranes are BnHn plus 4, BnHn plus 6 we have. And among all of them, the simplest borane is a diborane molecule we have. Simplest borane is diborane. That is simplest of all borane structure. And regarding the preparation of borane molecule, borane is prepared from boron trihalides only. Borane is prepared from boron trihalides. So reduction of boron trihalides will give us diborane molecule. If you see industrial method of preparation, BF3 is reduced using sodium hydride. NaH is a reducing agent. Reduction is forming as butH6 plus NeF. In laboratory method, BCl3 is used and is reduced by lithium aluminum hydride. It is also a reducing agent. It forms diborane, lithium chloride and AlCl3. So BCl3 on reduction using lithium aluminum hydride also gives rise to diborane molecule. Finally, that is when a mixture of boron chloride BCl3 and hydrogen is subjected to silent electric discharge, then also diborane is obtained. So when a mixture of BCl3 and H2 is subjected to silent electric discharge, diborane is obtained. So these are the various methods of the preparation of diborane molecule. So diborane is prepared from boron halides, boron trihalides. On reduction, using various reducing agents, we can get diborane molecule. Then comes the properties of diborane molecule. So diborane is a colorless gas, highly toxic gas which catches fire spontaneously when exposed to air. Catches fire spontaneously when exposed to air. Stability, it is stable at very low temperatures, and when heated between 373 and 575 Kelvin, it changes into number of higher boranes are being obtained here. When you are heating it to between 373 and 575 Kelvin, it changes into number of higher boranes. It burns in oxygen, releasing enormous amount of heat, and hence used as even a rocket fuel also. So on combustion, so B2H6 when burnt in air means in oxygen, it forms B2O3 plus H2 plus H2O, and delta H value is very much high here, minus 2165. We have so many kilojoules per mole we have. It is giving enormous amount of heat is being produced upon heating in air, hence is used as even rocket fuel also. Other properties of diborane. So diborane on hydrolysis, this reaction with water produces boric acid and liberates their H2 gas here. Hydrolysis, it forms boric acid. With halogen acids, means such as HCl, HBr and so on and so forth, diborane plus HCl gives rise to this molecule is called chlorodiborane. B2H5Cl is a chlorodiborane molecule and liberates H2 gas. With alkalis also, it is forming KBO, which is potassium metaborate, it forms and liberates H2 gas. So with halogen acids, that is hydrolysis, it is forming H2 gas is there plus boric acid. Action of halogen acids, it forms their H2 gas here, and then it forms chlorodiborane. Action of alkalis, it forms H2 gas here and forms potassium metaborate. So one common point to remember is with water, that is with water molecule, with halogen acids and with the base, it is forming H2. H2 is a common product in all the three reactions: hydrolysis, action of halogen acid and the action of alkalis. It produces H2 as one of the product in them. Then comes next other properties of diborane. So action of halogens here. If we take chlorine, because of its high reactivity, the complete molecule breaks down and we are going to get BCl3 and H2 and HCl there. If we take bromine molecule, it is less reactive in nature, so only substitution takes place in borane, and here you are going to get bromo diborane is being produced. So when you are using chlorine gas, chlorine being highly reactive in nature, it breaks down complete molecule and produces boron trichloride. If you are using bromine gas, it will not break down the molecule, only substitution takes place, and finally you are going to get here bromo diborane is being obtained here now. Then the properties further, the reaction with ammonia is one of the important property of diborane. So diborane reacts with ammonia under different conditions to give different type of products. Different conditions to give different type of products. So if you take diborane with excess of ammonia at low temperature, it is giving us an addition product which is called diammoniate of diborane. It is called diammoniate of diborane. At high temperature, the same composition gives rise to B3N3H6, which is called borazole, or is also called as borazine we have. So with excess ammonia, low temperature, it forms diammoniate of diborane. Same composition, high temperature, it forms borazine or borazole. So addition compound and further heating at 473 Kelvin is giving us borazine or borazole. Borazine has a cyclic structure similar to benzene, hence it is called inorganic benzene. So borazine or borazole is called inorganic benzene there. So let us see the structure of the inorganic benzene. So it is similar to benzene molecule. So nitrogen, but we have alternatively boron and then nitrogen atoms are there. So boron here, and then bonds. Alternate, we have double bonds are there, like that of benzene structure here. We have double bonds here, these two, and each atom is bonded to hydrogen atom there. So B3N3H6 structure is similar to benzene, hence called inorganic benzene, but this is more reactive when compared to inorganic benzene, because polarity exists in the inorganic benzene, not in the organic benzene. Then comes finally the structure of diborane molecule. So boron is undergoing sp3 hybridization there. So boron forms altogether 4 normal bonds are being formed here. And these bonds, which are the middle bonds, if you are seeing electron distribution, so these 4 bonds, that is boron here and boron here, we can see 4 of them are normal bonds here. So BH bonds, which involve completely electron pair, means this BH bond involves complete electron pair here now. When it comes to the other bond which is being formed between boron, hydrogen and then boron, we have only 2 electrons, means H is here, H is here. We have only 1 electron here and 1 electron here. Similarly, we have 1 here and then 1 here now. So only 1 electron pair here is binding 3 atoms, boron, hydrogen and then boron. So it is 3-centered, this is called 3-centered BHB. It is called 3-centered electron pair bond. Only 1 electron pair bonds 3 atoms here. This way, this also have this BHB also 3-centered electron pair bond here. So there are 2 3-centered 2 electron pair. There are 3-centered electron pair bonds. They are 2 in number here. They are also called banana bonds. This bond BHB bond is also called banana bond. It is a 3-centered electron pair bond we have. This is regarding structure of diborane molecule. So hybridization will be sp3 hybridization of the boron here. Bonds, all of them are not equivalent bonds here. Then when it comes to 14th group elements are carbon, silicon, germanium, tin and then lead we have. And general configuration will be NS2, NP2 we have. General configuration will be NS2, NP2. Then comes the properties, periodic properties of these elements here. Atomic size, metallic nature, these are increasing down the group. Melting point, electronegativity and ionization potential values, all the 3 of them are decreasing down the group. So atomic size, metallic nature will increase. Melting point, electronegativity and IP values are decreasing down the group. Then coming towards oxidation states, the common state is +4 state, but down the group here +2 state becomes more stable. That is because of the inert pair effect. Inert pair effect. So common oxidation state will be +4, but down the group +2 becomes more stable because of inert pair effect here. That is, atoms like germanium, tin and lead show +2 state also because of inert pair effect. But inert pair effect always increases down the group, and therefore for lead +2 state compounds are much more stable when compared to +2 state compounds of tin. So for tin, +4 compounds are stable, but for lead, +2 are stable because of inert pair effect. And however, they form only covalent compounds, whereas where the covalency of the atoms are 4 we have. So common state is +4, down the group +2 becomes more stable because of inert pair effect here, and then lead is having stable +2 compounds here, where the tin is having stable +4 compounds. So inert pair effect is more for lead when compared to tin, and they are forming covalent compounds here having a covalency of 4. Then coming towards metallic nature and non-metallic nature, the first two elements are non-metals here. Germanium comes under metalloid, remaining two of them are metals. Means down the group we can say metallic nature is increasing. Then comes catenation property. Here. So that is catenation property. It's a tendency to form long chains of identical atoms. If you are observing the bond energies, the extent of catenation is decreasing down the group. Carbon-carbon bond energy is 3, it is equivalent to 384. See, the values are coming down. So 180 here, 167, 155, and no catenation here. Means down the group, the bond energy strength is decreasing, bond strength is decreasing, thereby the extent of catenation is also decreasing down the group. Then comes allotropic. So various allotropic forms here. All elements except lead are exhibiting allotropic forms here. Carbon exhibits diamond, graphite, fullerenes, and coal, charcoal, lamp black, etc. So these three are coming under amorphous forms. First three are coming under crystalline forms here. Silicon has again crystalline form, amorphous forms are there. Germanium has two crystalline forms here. Tin is having alpha tin, beta tin, and gamma tin we have. Lead doesn't exhibit any allotropic form we have. Let us see the importance of the differences of diamond, graphite, and fullerenes. So importance comes only for those three allotropic forms of carbon. Coming towards diamond and then graphite differences we have. So diamond, as all of us know, is a transparent crystal structure and is opaque crystal structure. It's also having crystalline. Graphite is also having crystalline structure only. It's opaque there. And the brilliance is because of higher refractive index in the case of diamond. It's having just a shining property, only black shining property it has. Coming towards hybridization, in the diamond, carbon undergoes sp3 hybridization. Here the carbon undergoes sp2 hybridization here. So sp3, therefore, the tetrahedral arrangements, a polymer with tetrahedral arrangement of carbon atoms are there. sp2 here, therefore only 3 atoms are bonded to each and every atom and forms hexagonal rings of the carbon atoms, forming sheets of one carbon atom thickness we have. Sheets of only just one carbon atom thickness we have is a tetrahedral arrangement of carbon atoms in this case. Hardest substance because a very huge polymeric structure here. It's a sheet like very soft structure. One layer can move over the other layer and thereby very much soft in nature. Then conductivity, it's a bad conductor because all electrons are completely used up in bonding. It's a very good conductor because of the presence of one free electron upon each atom. That free electron starts moving throughout the crystal structure. Density is very high because of the compact structure. Density is not that much high here. We can say low density because of not compact structure like diamond here. And thermodynamically speaking, the diamond is less stable because it's having more energy. Thermodynamically, diamond is less stable because of more energy, and thermodynamically, graphite is more stable because graphite has lesser amount of energy. Does not mark on the paper because of a compact tetrahedral structure. When you are placing a graphite on a paper, it marks paper because due to detachment of few layers of hexagonal rings of carbon when rubbed on the paper. So it is marking on the paper, hence used to making pencil leads here. Used very tough material, hence used as a abrasive for cutting of glass and used in the jewelry and used in the pencils crucibles, electrodes, as well as lubricants. Lubricants, because of the very soft structure we have lubricants here, it marks the paper, hence used in the pencils here now. Electrodes, because of the free electrons are there, it's a very good conductor, therefore it is used as electrodes. These are some of the differences between the carbon, that is allotropic forms, diamond, and then graphite we have. Excuse me. Then comes fullerenes. Fullerenes are allotropic forms of carbon having truncated icosahedron structures. Icosahedron structure, truncated icosahedron structure. So they are named fullerenes because of American architect Richard Buckminster Fuller. American architect Richard Buckminster Fuller. Fullerenes have hexagonal and pentagonal structures. Fullerenes have hexagonal and pentagonal structures. If we see the football structure, we can understand it is having hexagonal as well as pentagonal rings on football. So the C60 has 20 hexagonal rings, and then we have 12 pentagonal rings. We have C60 contains 20 hexagonal rings and 12 pentagonal rings we have, whereas C70 contains 25 hexagonal rings and then 12 pentagonal rings we have. Implies that pentagonal rings are same in both the structures. Only thing is hexagonal rings are different. In C60 form we have 20 and C70 form we have 25 hexagonal rings. Implies that both the structures are having hexagonal rings as well as the pentagonal rings in them. Then the carbon atoms are sp2 hybridized in this one, but there is no delocalization of electrons because of non-planar structures. When they're having structures like soccer ball, it will be a circular structure, and thereby it's non-planar structure here. Thereby there is no delocalization of electrons. No delocalization of electrons. C60 is having a spherical shape, the soccer ball of diameter 710 pm, whereas C70 is having structure of a rugby ball. A rugby ball is something like ellipsoidal type of structure. It has two diameters as 780 pm and then 690 pm we have. So a rugby ball is something like ellipsoidal structure. It has two diameters 780 and 690. 690 we have. Whereas C60 spherical shape like a soccer ball, it is 710 picometers we have. Fullerenes are not aromatic in nature. There is no delocalization of pi electrons. They are non-aromatic in nature. Therefore, they are giving us addition reactions similar to alkenes we have. Therefore, they give us addition reactions similar to alkenes we have. So, this is regarding fullerenes. Then comes another important feature of 14th group elements. 14th group elements, it is having a semiconducting property, especially silicon as well as germanium. Now, coming towards N-type. It is offered by silicon germanium when it is doped with the 15th group elements like phosphorus and then arsenic. So the N type of semiconductivity, when you are doping silicon and germanium with 15th group elements like arsenic and phosphorus, the free electron left on phosphorus or arsenic move throughout the crystal structure, and this is said to be N type of semiconductivity. So they are having free electrons are there which are moving throughout the structure, hence they are called N type of semiconductivity because negative charge is moving throughout the structure. Now coming towards P type of conductivity, the same thing when silicon and germanium are say doped with 13th group elements like boron and aluminum. Boron or aluminum, 13th group elements like boron or aluminum, the extra positive hole created on boron or aluminum move in one direction and electrons move in the opposite direction. This is called P type of semiconductivity. So when silicon and germanium are doped with 13th group elements like boron or aluminum, the extra positive hole created on boron or aluminum move in one direction, whereas electrons move in opposite direction, and this gives a P type of semiconductivity. Then comes the compounds of 14th group elements. First one, hydrides. 14th group elements show catenating property and form several type of hydrides are there like CH4, SiH4, GH4, SNH4 and PbH4. They are forming hydrides of several type because of catenating property. So carbon can form even more number of hydrides also, where exclusively an organic chemistry there for that. Coming towards oxides of this group, oxides Of the two types of oxides are there, they are monoxides and dioxides we have. So CO, GeO, SNO, PbO are monoxides, and dioxides are carbon dioxide, CO2, SiO2, GeO2, SnO2 and PO2. When it comes to the properties of these compounds, CO is neutral in nature. CO is neutral in nature. GO we can say a distinctly acidic molecule you have. It is acidic in nature. And then remaining two molecules, they are coming under amphoteric properties. Remaining two of them are amphoteric in nature. When it comes to dioxides here, the first two of them, they are acidic oxides. First two are acidic oxides here. And remaining molecules, they are coming under amphoteric in nature. Remaining are amphoteric in nature we have. So implies that down the group we can see one point, down the group basic properties increasing. So this is regarding oxides and dioxides in nature. Now the importance of the first three. So if you see carbon monoxide has a triple bond and then it's having a lone pair of electron on carbon. So it can donate electron pair. So basically acts as a Lewis base and very good ligand. Very good ligand in the complex formation. That is, when you take carbon dioxide structure, is a linear molecule. So two sigma bonds and then two pi bonds are there. When you take silica is a tetrahedral structure. That is a huge polymeric form. Each silicon is bonded to four oxygen atoms. Each silicon is bonded to four oxygen atoms tetrahedrally. And it goes on again, one more silicon here. It extends and so on and so forth. You have structure extends. So silica is solid structure. It is having a tetrahedral. All silicon atoms are tetrahedrally bonded to four other oxygen atoms. So tetrahedral structure we have. Then comes towards the halides. So they form tetrahalides. Here, and stability decreases with the increase in atomic number of the central atom. Means down the group we can say stability is decreasing there now. And for the same element, if you see, stability decreases with the size of the halogen atom. Means suppose if you take carbon CCl4 and if you take say SiCl4 and say GeCl4. So here down the group stability is increasing because of increasing in the size of the central atom there now. So stability is decreasing, stability decreases down the group. Now when you take a particular atom, say for example CCl4 here and then CbR4 and say Ci4, if you take like this in this way also, the stability of these molecules is gradually decreasing here now. Decreasing order because the size of the halogen atom is increasing. So stability of the molecules down the group decreases. If you take a particular element also, it will be decreasing as the size of the halogen atom is increasing there now. Then comes silicates now. Silicates are polymeric solids having SiO4 units, tetrahedral units in that. This is a basic unit. And there are different type of silicates are there, like chain silicates, sheet silicates, cyclic silicates, and three-dimensional silicates also. Earth crust mainly contains silicates in that. So if you take silicate unit, it will be tetrahedral unit of silicate unit contains like this. So each one carries a negative charge. So SiO4 minus 4 here. In short, we can represent like this silicate unit, a triangular form, triangular structure. So these are the three, and there is one more silicon in the middle having an oxygen atom behind that one. So this is silicon here, representing silicon, and remaining are the oxygen atoms here. All four oxygen. This is also an oxygen atom here. So three are bonded here. So in short, we are representing like this now. Now different type of silicates, it is coming depending upon the number of oxygen atoms shared per each silicate unit. Number of oxygen atoms shared per each silicate unit. Different type of silicates are formed, which are given as chain silicates, sheet silicates, etc. etc. Suppose when you take two silicate units, let us take two silicate units like this. one silicate unit, one more unit in this way we have. So these two are silicate units. If two silicate units say are sharing only one oxygen atom, that is said to be pyrosilicates. They are called pyrosilicates here. Means here it comes in this way. Silicon atom tetrahedrally bonded. Here we have one common oxygen atom. One common oxygen we have. So it comes like this. So this is said to be a pyrosilicate. One common oxygen, that common oxygen atom here. Remaining carry negative charge as it is. So if one atom is shared between two units, it is said to be pyrosilicates now. Suppose two are being shared, means the structure comes like this. Two are being shared, it can extend like this also. It can form chain or else ring it can form. So if you see in this way, in the corners it is shared here now. So this one silicate unit is sharing two oxygen atoms. It leads to formation of chain. It can be even cyclic silicate also. Implies depending upon the number of atoms shared per each unit of silicate, different type of silicates can be obtained. Like one is being shared pyro, two are being shared, it can be chain or else can be chain or even ring silicates and so on and so forth we have. Then comes some organosilicon polymers. Silicones are organosilicon synthetic polymers containing SiO-Si linkages. SiO-Si linkages. They are obtained by hydrolysis followed by condensation of alkyl halosilanes. Hydrolysis followed by condensation of alkyl halosilanes. So alkyl halosilanes. Hydrolysis followed by condensation. Let us take an example of say R2SiCl2. So you can say it is dialkyl dichlorosilane we have. So but this is a molecular hydrolysis, this on hydrolysis. So this on hydrolysis. So these two Cl atoms will become now OH groups. So OH here, silicon, R, OH and R group we have. A diol is being obtained now. So this on condensation phenomena. This must be condensed now. So first of all, they are hydrolyzed and diols are being produced. They are now condensed. So let us take the condensation of the molecule obtained. So here we have OH, that is silicon here, alkyl group here, one more OH here. You have taken one more diol like this. Again silicon here, R and OH. Between these two, it will be losing one water molecule. So bond is nothing but SiO-SA bond is produced. Like SiO-SA bond is being produced. That way it continues. That way you are going to get linear, planar, cyclic polymers. Different type of polymers are produced. They may be linear, or cyclic or planars. So silicones are basically consisting of SiO-Si bonds in that. And they are obtained by hydrolysis and condensation of alkyl halosilanes. Hydrolysis and condensation of alkyl halosilanes. Then coming towards properties of silicones. Silicones can be used as high temperature oil baths. And insulating materials, waterproof clothes can be prepared by them. To mix with the paints, lubricants for airplanes. And as silicone rubbers that retain elasticity even at very high temperature. As silicone rubbers.